Welcome back to another AHT Cloud training series. In this course, you will learn everything you need to know about Docker. We will be building a new Laravel Docker template that you can use to run all your Laravel projects. Our implementation will include 6 containers, one for PHP, one for WebSockets, database, Redis, Queue, and Node. If you're not using any of these services, you can just comment that out and still use the same template to run your project. I will also provide you with a sample project that we built in our last tutorial, which is the chat application. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel to stay up to date with my latest training videos. To get the most out of this course, I expect that you have some basic knowledge in Linux. You must be comfortable using a terminal, and you must have a basic understanding of what's involved in hosting and deploying Laravel projects. If you don't know how to build Laravel projects, I highly recommend you watch my previous video, Deploy Any Laravel Application on AWS. Docker is a platform for developing, shipping, and running your applications. It lets you build and run your projects in containers. Typically, when you host a Laravel project, at the bare minimum, you would need 3 components: a server, a database, and you need to have PHP installed. With Docker, you can build a container for each component. So you would have one for PHP, one for your database, and one for your server. Once you create your Docker build for your project, you can use it to rebuild your projects on any other computer without spending time configuring your server manually. To install Docker, we're going to go to docker.com. On the homepage, go to Developers, then click on Docs. From here, you want to click on Download and Install. Now you want to select the installation for your operating system. If you're using Mac, then you can select between the Intel chip and the Mac M1 chip here. If you're running Windows, then you'll need to download the Docker desktop as well. And also you need to make sure you install WSL, and you can find the link for that here. You should be able to see all the instructions. Once you have Docker installed, it should look something like this. This is the user interface that helps you manage your containers. We're not going to be using it. We will be using the terminal. You want to make sure that you have Docker up and running. So you want to write docker-v. And here, if it's working, you should see the Docker version. On the Docker interface, you want to click on the top here, Settings. You want to make sure that you have used Docker Compose v2 turned on. And if you're running this on Windows, you want to go to Resources, WSL integration, and you want to make sure that you have this enabled. Now you'll want to create a new directory for your project. I called mine Laravel-Docker. You can create a new Laravel project here, or I recommend you use the chat application that we built in our last tutorial. For that, you'll want to go to my GitHub account. That's on github.com/emad, EMAD-Zamout, ZAAMOUT. The link is in the description. Then you'll want to go to repositories, and you'll want to select the Laravel WebSocket chat application example. From here, you can click on code and you can download it as a zip, or you can just clone it. I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL here. I'm going to go back to our directory, and from here, we're going to open our terminal, and I'm going to run get pull, and I'll paste my URL here. Oh yeah, before we can run get pull, we'll have to run get init. All right, now we should be able to see we have all our files in here. The first Docker command I want to teach you is docker ps. This will tell you the status of all your Docker containers on your computer. You can see here, for now, we don't have anything. Another command that I want to show you, which is the same command, is docker compose ps. And you can see here, it says no configuration file found. Now, Docker command works globally. It will work in whatever directory you are, it will show you the same thing. Docker compose is dependent on the directory you're in, if it has the Docker compose file or not. Docker compose is used to manage multiple containers for your project. Now we're going to create our starter Docker file. So you want to open your project in your code editor, and you want to create a new file. It's called Docker file. And you want to also create a new file, and it's Docker compose. So docker-compose.yaml, YML. And you'll also want to create a new directory in here. Let's call it Docker. Now you'll want to create another file inside your Docker folder and call it entry point.sh. If you don't know what all these files are for, don't worry. We're going to cover all this once we start building our Laravel project. Now, before we go to our next step, let's go back to our terminal and let's check what happens when we run docker compose ps. And you should see this error, top level object must be a mapping. And this is a good error. It indicates that our docker compose file is created. Now we're going to build our database container to run MySQL server for us. In your code editor, you'll want to open your docker compose YAML file. And the first thing you want to do is we want to specify the docker compose version. As of today, the latest version is 3.8. Now we will need to create a new volume. So volumes is going to be used to store our data. Every time you start and shut down your Docker containers, you will lose all your data. To make it persistent, you will need to create a volume which will store it on your local drive. So let's go ahead and write volumes. And for the value, for the key, we're going to write db data. This can be any name you like. And then we're going to add tilde. Now let's go ahead and create our database server. So we're going to add a new service. So we write services. And let's go ahead and add some spaces in here. And I'm going to add a comment and I'm going to say database server. And in here, let's call it database. This can be any name you like. For the image, we're going to be using MySQL and you want to specify your version. Now we're going to expose our port so we can connect to our database container. So here we write ports and we want to expose port 3306 locally and we want to make it 3306 externally. So we can connect to it from our computer using the port 3306. Now for the username and password and the database, we're going to grab this information from our env file. So in here, you want to make sure you go to your env example file and let's open this up on another screen. So we have our database connection. If you want to connect to your instance for the host, you're going to have to use the name that you write here. We called it database. For the port, it's 3306. This is the same port that we set in here. You can obviously change this to any number you like, but you want to stay consistent with the convention. 3306 for MySQL. Now we want Docker to create our new database using these variables. So we want to set our database name, our username, and our password as we specify it in here. To do that, we're going to enter environments. And in here, we're going to specify a name and a value. For the name, the first thing we're going to do is set our database. So we write MySQL underscore database equal, and we want to access the value in here. So we do that by writing the $sign and curly brackets. And in here, we want to specify the name that we have. So let's copy it here. I'm going to copy and paste this 4 times. Let's go ahead and set our username. And that's going to be MySQL user. For the password, same thing, MySQL password. Let's go ahead and copy our password from here. And for the last one, let's say MySQL root password. And let's set it to the same value as the password we have in here. Now our last step is we want to specify where we want to store our data, and that's going to be inside our volume in here. So we do that by writing volume And the first value is going to be db data, which is this name right here. And we want to specify the location internally on our server. And that's going to be inside var, lib as in library, and MySQL. That's the default location. Now let's go ahead and build this container. So we're going to open our terminal and let's run docker compose up 2 dashes build. Now once that's done, let's go ahead and scroll all the way to the top. And you should see that we have some errors in here. And it's saying that the database variables that we have set are not set. That's because we created those variables inside our env example file. We will want to have it also inside our env file. That's where it actually reads it off. So let's go ahead and copy our example file and create our env file. Now let's go back to our terminal and let's do docker compose ps. And you can see here our Docker container has a status of exit 1, which means it doesn't work. So let's go ahead and write docker compose down in case if you have yours running. And you'll want to go ahead and write docker compose up build again. Once that's done running, you can't really use this terminal anymore. You'll have to keep it open. On the left here, you will see all the messages relating to your Docker container, Laravel Docker database 1. Let's go ahead and try to connect to this Docker container. So I have my database client open in here. I'm going to try to connect. So the IP address is 127.0.0.1. That's our local host. The user was Homestead. The password is secret. And we set those inside our environment variables. We exposed port 3306. Let's try to connect. And you can see here all the messages relating to our connections. And you can see I connected to my database. Now, if you don't want to keep this terminal open all the time, what you can do is press Ctrl+C to exit. Then write docker compose up -d. So the D mode is basically detached. So it will run in the background without you having to keep the terminal open. Let's go ahead and write docker compose ps to see the status of our containers. And you can see here our container named Laravel Docker database 1 has a status of running. In here, you will see our port mapping. Now, the IP address here that you see 0.0.0.0 is also your local host. However, this is used by your Docker containers. So your Docker containers communicate through this port, but when you try to communicate with it from your computer, you will use 127.0.0.1. Here on the right, we should see the ports mapping. So we're mapping port 3306 to port 3306. Now, anytime you want to stop running this Docker container, you write docker compose down. Once that's done, go ahead and write docker compose ps. And you should see that there are no running containers. Now we're going to build our Redis container. So we're going to create a new service. Let's go ahead and add a comment and say Redis server. And let's go ahead and call it Redis. For the image, we're going to use the Redis Alpine. And we want to run a command, which is going to be Redis server, append only, and we're going to require a password. So this command will run every time we start our Redis container. So this is going to start our Redis server. So in our env file, we have a Redis password field and it's set to null. You can add whatever password you would like to use. Null is fine. You need to make sure you have it for your env and env.example file. Now to get that variable, we're going to add quotations and a $sign and curly brackets. And we're going to reference the Redis password from our environment variable. Now our last step is we will need to create our ports. So we're going to map ports. And for Redis, the default ports are 6379 and we're going to map that to 6379. Let's go ahead and run this. So back to our terminal, and we're going to run docker compose up dash D to run it in detached mode. Once that's done, it should look something like this. Now you'll want to make sure that your container is actually running. So we're going to write docker compose ps. And we can see here that we have our database running and we have our Redis running. And we map port 6379 to 6379. Now we're going to build our PHP service. This one is going to be a little bit different than the database and the Redis server. Let's go ahead and create our new service. The first thing we want to do is add a comment and let's say PHP service. Let's call it PHP. For our PHP service, we're going to build it inside our Docker file so we could run custom commands. Inside your Docker file, the first thing you want to do is specify your image for PHP. So we're going to write from PHP and your PHP version. In my case, 8.1 as PHP. So the as part is just giving it a name so we could use it as a variable. I'm calling it PHP. This could be anything else you like. Now let's go back to our Docker compose file and we want to run whatever is inside this section under the from PHP 8.1. So inside our Docker compose file, we can reference this file by using the build command. Now for the build command, we're going to add 3 variables: context, and we're going to reference our current directory. Target is going to be PHP. So the target is basically what you have set in here as PHP or whatever variable, that's the target. We're going to also provide some arguments. So we're going to add args to give some variables, and we're going to specify that the app env is equal to what we have set inside our environment variable. So we're going to use a $sign and curly brackets to reference the app env. And we're going to also add an environment variable for this. So we're going to write environment. For the name, we're going to add also the app env. I'm just going to copy this line. And we're going to add another one. Let's copy this. And let's say it's called container role. You don't have to know what this does yet. We will get there later on. So let the container role be app. We're going to also have to specify the working directory inside our PHP server. So in here, we're going to write working dir for directory. And it's going to be var www. It can be any directory you like, but var www is the standard when you host your project on your server. For the volume, so we could grab our data, we're just going to use the current directory and we're going to save that to var www. Now we're going to add our ports and we're going to map port 8000 to 8000 again. Now, this could be any number you like. You could map 8000 to 880, but this is pretty standard. Now, our last step for the Docker Compose file here is we want this server to be built after the database and the Redis server are built. So to do that, we're going to say that this service depends on, and we're going to specify the database, and we're going to also specify the Redis. This way, we can have our database and Redis created first, then this will be created after. Otherwise, you will have a race condition when you try to create all of them at once, and you try to run our Docker script where we're going to be building our server, running migrations. It's not going to work. Now, let's go back to our Docker file here. Once we build our server, we want to run some commands. So we want to basically install extensions and things like that. So the first thing we want to do is run apt-get update so we could update our server. Then we will want to install some extensions. So I'm going to run. So the run command lets you run commands inside your server once it gets installed. So we're going to install unzip We're gonna also install libpq-dev, and we're gonna install also the curl dev command. And we're gonna also run and install some Docker PHP extensions. We're gonna install BDO and PDO for MySQL. We're gonna install BC Math. And basically you wanna add all your extensions that you wanna install here for PHP. Remember guys, this file, this part gets run once our container for PHP is up and running. So we wanna also install Redis so we could use it in our program. So we're gonna run, and we're gonna use PECL to install Redis. And the command goes like this: install -o-f Redis. And then if you want to write on the next line, you just have to add a slash or backslash. And we're going to run another command, and it's going to be, we want to remove all the files that once we install Redis gets installed by default for us. And that's going to be inside our temp perf folder. And we're going to also install the Docker extension for Redis. So we do that by writing Docker PHP extension, and we're going to enable Redis. Now, after all this is done, we're going to copy our project files to our server. So first, we want to specify our working directory, and that's going to be inside our var www folder. You could use any folder you like, but this is standard. Once we're inside that folder, we're going to copy our code files from here, and we're going to place it inside our work directory, which is the var www. Now, our last step for installing, we're going to also install Composer. So to do that, I'm going to copy the image from, and we're going to write Composer and specify the Composer version. I'm using 2.3.5. And I'm going to copy it from this folder, and that's pretty default. And I want to add this to the same location on our server. Now, once we have all this installed, I want to do things like run our migrations, install our Composer dependencies. So I'm going to have to specify here an entry point file so we could run our bash script. To do that, we write entry point. And if you guys remember, we created this Docker folder in the entry point.sh file. We're going to reference it here. So inside here, we're going to write docker/entry point.sh. And let's go ahead and go to that file. So here you could write any command that you want to run that's not relating to installations. So it's a bin bash file. Let's not forget to add our first line here. The very first thing I want to do is I want to install our Composer dependency. I'm going to add two flags, the no progress, and I'm going to add the no interaction. The reason why I add no interaction is I don't want any input. Once you install Composer, sometimes it asks you for yes or no input. We don't want that to prevent our script from running. Now, I want to save time as well. I don't want this to keep running every single time if Composer dependencies are already installed. So I'm going to wrap this in an if statement. And I'm going to say if the file vendor autoload. If this does not exist, then we want to run our Composer install. Otherwise, it's already installed. There's no reason to run it two times. And let's add our then here. Let's indent this line. And let's close our if statement. If someone forgot to create the env file, I want to just copy the env.example file. To do that, I'm going to write another if statement, and I'm going to say if the file .env does not exist, then we will want to copy our env example file. So I'm going to do an echo to display a message, and I'm going to say creating env file for env, and let's specify our app env. Now, the app env value is actually coming from your Docker Compose. We have it set here if you remember. And we have set also a container value. So we can access these variables like this here. All right, once we display that, we want to copy our file. To do that, we're just gonna use the cp command. So we're gonna copy the env.example file to env. And we're gonna close the if statement. Actually, let's add an else case. So if environment variable already exists, let's display a message and saying env file exists. Let's go ahead and close our if statement. Now our next step is we wanna run PHP artisan migrate to run our migration files. We wanna generate our app key. And you don't need this, but just to show you, you can clear your cache. You can clear your config cache as well. And you can run route clear. You can run as many commands as you like here, all the commands that you need to set up. And after all that, I'm going to run PHP artisan serve on the port. And for the port, we have to specify this, we have to declare this variable. So we're going to go back to our Docker file. And in here, we're going to create a new variable. On top of the entry point, let's say env. We're going to create a new variable and let's call it port. And we're going to give this a value of 8000. Let's go back to our entry point file and we're going to reference it here. So we're going to run our Laravel application on port 8000. And we're going to specify the host to be 0.0.0.0. And we will specify our env file. Now, once that's done, let's also execute the default Docker PHP entry point. Let's go ahead and try running our new container. So we're going to go back to the terminal and we're going to run Docker compose down. Then we're going to run Docker compose up. And here looks like we have an error inside our Docker compose file. It's saying that the volume must be a list. So we probably have some typo in there. So let's go back to our Docker compose file and let's see what happened. So volumes, we missed a space here. So spaces and indentation is very important for your Docker files. Let's go ahead and try to run that again. Docker compose down and Docker compose up. And I'm going to also run it in detached mode. Now our next step is we want to run PHP artisan migrate to run our migration files. We want to generate our app key. And you don't need this, but just to show you, you can clear your cache. You can clear your config cache as well. And you can run route clear. You can run as many commands as you like here, all the commands that you need to set up. And after all that, I'm going to run PHP artisan serve on the port. And for the port, we have to specify this, we have to declare this variable. So we're going to go back to our Docker file. And in here, we're going to create a new variable. On top of the entry point, let's say env. We're going to create a new variable and let's call it port. And we're going to give this a value of 8000. Let's go back to our entry point file and we're going to reference it here. So we're going to run our Laravel application on port 8000. And we're going to specify the host to be 0.0.0.0. And we will specify our env file. Now, once that's done, let's also execute the default Docker PHP entry point. Let's go ahead and try running our new container. So we're going to go back to the terminal and we're going to run Docker compose down. Then we're going to run Docker compose up. And here looks like we have an error inside our Docker compose file. It's saying that the volume must be a list. So we probably have some typo in there. So let's go back to our Docker compose file and let's see what happened. So volumes, We missed a space here. Spaces and indentation is very important for your Docker files. Let's go ahead and try to run that again. Docker compose down and Docker compose up, and I'm gonna also run it in detached mode. Looks like we got an error, and it's saying that it failed to install the extension here, BC match. This is a mistake. It's supposed to be BC math, not match. Let's go back and fix that. So we're gonna go to our Docker file, and here we're gonna just remove that C. So BC math, and let's go ahead and run this again. And we got another error, and here this time it's saying that PRECL not found. This is supposed to be PECL. There's no R. That's another typo. So let's go ahead and fix that. So back to our Docker file, and here we're going to remove that R. Let's go ahead and run this again. Once that's done, it should look something like this. Let's go ahead right now and see what's happening with our Docker containers. So I'm going to write Docker compose PS, and here you can see our PHP is running, and it's on port 8000. So let's go ahead and give this a try. On the browser, I'm going to go to 127.0.0.1 on port 8000. And here we have an error. It's saying that the app key is required, but it was empty. You should not be seeing this error. But if you do, what you want to do is you want to go to your PHP code again, and you want to go to your env file. Scroll all the way down, and here where you find the pusher variables, you want to add the keyword staging for all of these values. You shouldn't be seeing this because I have updated my GitHub repository to include these. Once you make any changes related to WebSockets, you will need to restart your servers. So I'm going to run Docker compose down and Docker compose up again. Once that's done, let's go ahead and try again. We're going to go to our web page and refresh. And you should be able to see now the home page. It shouldn't be working. So if you press connect, it's not going to work. That's because we don't have our queue and we don't have our WebSocket server set up. Before we create our WebSocket and our queue servers, let's go back to our terminal. I want to show you some good useful commands. So I'm going to clear everything and let's write Docker compose PS. Let's say right now you want to create a new migration file. So you want to execute your PHP artisan command inside your Laravel Docker PHP container. To do that, you write Docker, execute, and then you write the container name. And for now, let's just write PHP artisan. Now you ran this command inside your PHP container. This is just an example. The syntax is like this: Docker, execute, the container name, and the command that you want to run inside that container. Now, sometimes you want to also connect and SSH into your container. You can easily do that. So let's write Docker compose PS and let's SSH or go inside our PHP container. So we're going to write Docker, execute. If you're on Windows, you need the -it, and you're gonna write your Docker container name, and that was php-1, and you wanna write /bin/sh. If you're on Windows, you will get this error, and you will need to add this winpt first. If you're on Mac, you don't need to do this, so let's go ahead and add it. winpty. If you get this error, this only happens if you're on Windows. So you will need to change this. You'll just need to add 2 backslashes for bin and sh. Now we're inside our container. You can see we have our files in here. Now we're going to be building our node server. Node, we're going to be using it to run npm commands and run npm install. In order for us to build the node, we're going to do the same thing we did for PHP. So we're going to go to the Docker file and let's go ahead in here and add a new comment. And I'm just going to add the equal signs and I'm going to write a comment here and I'm going to say node. So for node, we're going to do the same thing that we did for PHP. We're going to say from and we're going to specify the image and we're going to be using node 14 Alpine. You can specify your version. And we did here as PHP, so we're gonna do here as node. And we wanna do the same thing we did here as well. We wanna copy the work directory. When we first create our image, we wanna copy our files. Then we will want to run npm install. global and cross env. This is required for my project, but it might not be required for yours. We're gonna also run npm install. And now I'm just going to specify our volume, which is going to be inside var www node modules. Let's go back to our Docker Compose file and let's scroll all the way down. So we're going to create a new service for node. For the name, let's call it node. And we're going to do the same thing as we did here for PHP. I'm just going to copy this line, the build. Let's add it in here. For the target, we're going to be using node. I don't really need arguments for node, so we're going to remove this. But I am going to be adding our volume so we can access our data. And for the volume, we're going to specify our current directory and we're going to map that to user source. And we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to also attach our node modules folder to our user source node modules. And our last step is we're going to turn TTY to true. Now let's go back to our terminal. Let's go ahead and run Docker Compose down and Docker Compose up in detach mode. Let's double check that it's actually working. So we're going to run Docker Compose PS and you should be able to see here we have our node container. It's up and running. To create our queue, we're going to create a new service. Let's scroll up and let's minimize all what we have so far. All right, I'm going to create this on top of the node server. Let's add a new comment and let's just say this is for our queue server. Let's call it queue. And for the build, we're going to do the same thing that we did for PHP. Let's copy this. Actually, let's copy even the environment. And let's add it inside our queue. For the container role, you want to change this from app to queue. All right. Now we're going to also copy the working directory. And we will also copy our volume. That's pretty much it for our queue for in Docker Compose. Now, notice here we're using the same target as PHP. So we're going to be running the same Docker part for PHP. And we have the same entry point. So let's go back to our entry point. For our entry point, we want to install Composer if it does not exist. We also want to create our env file if it does not exist. But for the queue, we don't want to run this. This is only for the PHP application. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this in an if statement. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new variable and I'm going to call it role. And role is going to be coming from our Docker Compose file. Remember how we set this container role inside environment? For the queue, it has the value of queue. For the PHP, it has the value of app. And let's add that here. All right. Now we're going to make an if statement and say if the role is equal to app, then we want to basically run all this. And let's go ahead and indent this. All right. Now, else if the role is equal to queue, then we're going to run basically our queue command here. We're going to write echo and I'm going to say running the queue. And let's go ahead and run our queue command. So we're going to write PHP. We're going to have to point to our PHP directory so we can run artisan commands. And we're going to say queue work. I'm going to set the verbose flag on. And I'm going to say tries equal 3 to try 3 times. Timeout, I'm going to set it to 180. So I'm going to run Docker Compose down and Docker Compose up. Once that runs, you want to run docker compose ps. And in my case, looks like I got an error code here, but I wanted to use this opportunity to show you guys how to look up the logs. So right now, both of these exited, so they failed. I'm going to write docker logs, and I'm going to start off with the PHP. Let me copy this, and I'm going to paste it here. And here, the log is telling me inside the entry point file, line 16, I am missing this symbol. So let's go ahead and see what's happening there. And if you take a look here, I have this symbol, and this should not be there. So we're going to have to remove it from here. And we're going to also have to remove this symbol from here. I added it by mistake. And actually, while we're at it, let's take this one and let's put it inside our app, because I don't want this to run for our queue. And another thing I see here, it's a mistake. We need to have spaces between our if statements. Now let's go ahead and try running this again. Once that's done, let's go ahead and run docker compose ps. And you can see they're all up and running. To enable WebSockets, it's really easy. We're going to create a new service. Let's just literally copy all the PHP service. And let's rename PHP here to WebSocket. And we want to keep the target the same. We want to change the environment container role from here to WebSocket. And we want to change, so the depends at on database and Redis, that's correct. We want to leave it. For the port, we're going to expose port 6001. We're going to all map that to 6001. Now we're going to go to our entry point, and let's go all the way to our if statement here. So what we want to do is we want to write a new else case. Let's copy this. And else if the role is WebSocket. And let's go ahead and copy the echo here as well and say running the WebSocket server. And to run Laravel WebSockets, it's really easy. We're going to write PHP artisan WebSockets serve. And that should be pretty much it. Let's try running this. So we're going to run docker compose down and docker compose up. Let's double check that it's working. So we're going to write docker compose ps, and looks like they're all running. Let's check our website. So I'm going to refresh my page here, and I'm going to connect my user. And let's open another browser page, and let's connect another user. And let's open a last one. And let's just connect without a user. So for the first one, I'm going to write a message. I'm going to say hi. And you should be able to see the message come here if the WebSockets are connected. And looks like it's working. Let's check on the other browser screen. You can see the same message. And this is a real-time chat application. Thank you for watching. If you guys found this tutorial useful, I would greatly appreciate it if you hit that like button. If you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe to my channel to stay up to date with my latest training videos. If you have any questions, don't forget to leave it on a comment down below. And we'll see you on the next video.